So in the last session, we really had a discussion about the vested 5 rules, how you can take those rules and put them into practice. And we asked you to submit lots of questions. So we had quite a few. And this is a Zoom format, it's actually even more interactive. So I really like this format for this. So if you've got direct questions, go ahead and raise your hand or put them in chat. I actually encourage you to raise your hand. You can put them in chat, but if you don't know how to raise hands in Zoom, you click on the participants and you'll just see that kind of jump in, because I think it's actually better if we have a real dialogue. And I do have a list, so y'all submitted some good questions, which is awesome, and we'll get to those. But if the people who spent time to come to this session, I want to make sure we answer your questions, and then we commit to get answers back to all of the questions that we had. So if you put some in chat and we haven't got to, that'd be great. So I want to kick off first with a question. This was addressed to you, Amanda. Amanda, how do based on the deals you've done, what's the key driver to move to a vested partnership model? So take, for example, Johnson & Johnson. Why did they want to switch to vested?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I mean, we have had customers or clients from all industries and sectors. So it's not that we can see a true pattern on what type of industry has specific issues or key drivers. But what I can say is, looking holistically throughout the deals that we've done, the initial discussions that has been the drivers that we've seen with our clients is that it's usually either that they have a relationship that they want to take to the next level in terms of things are working well. However, they're feeling that there are lack of innovation, proactivity, and teamwork. And those are usually the words that we see that traditional deals usually get. You get the low cost, sort of the simplification of services, you get sort of the basics. But then when looking at, so we really want to have a partner that can transform our service delivery and take the next level into delivering support to our business. That is definitely the key drivers that we're seeing in the market. So, and specifically now during these turbulent times, companies understand that they need to find a true partner that can help them navigate this landscape, because sort of writing up a contract that is rigid is not going to deliver on the future for them. So it's really the key desired outcomes and the drivers of innovation, teamwork, and proactivity from both parties that we're seeing.
Yeah, Amanda, you talked about that. That's where we would see a lot of people would say, I love my partner, but they're really, it's transactional. So even though I say strategic partner, it's not. And we use this example of a watermelon scorecard, green scores, red faces. The service provider's doing everything that they're contractually obligated to do. They're hitting a green scorecard, but they're just not getting the innovation that they want. But now with COVID, and I'm really interested to see your answer on this, we're seeing that it's not just the innovation, but the flexibility, right? Yeah. That being able to pivot so quickly, be on the same teams to address the dynamic nature of business. Is that something you're seeing too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, every year we have what we call a vested roundtable here in the Nordics, where we gather all the people that has done vested deals, and we see it's sort of a network. So everyone now it's not live, but we were virtually sitting in the same room having discussions. So and sharing ideas, how the vested partnership has been going and how are they progressing over time. And it's truly rewarding for each and every one of them that is participating, both from the supplier and buyer side, to see sort of how they are transforming the relationships. And I mean, from a COVID perspective as well, it's been, I think the key aspect there that I've seen and heard in these discussions is primarily what you say, that the rapid execution and proactivity, which is supported by the governance model of a vested agreement that is enabling both parties to make those quick decisions and shift depending on the business needs.
Yeah. So the governance, flexible, the pricing model, it's a model instead of a price.
Yeah.
So it really enables you to have that flexibility. So Elijah, same question, but different angle. So you're a chief customer officer, you're from the supplier side, been around, done lots and lots of deals. So why is vested interest Sunland Logistics? You know, from your perspective, why do you try to educate your customers that this is a good way to go?
Yeah.
What are the drivers from a supplier perspective?
Yeah, because, look, we are looking for, we really believe in the concept of win-win. I mean, that's just, it's not what's in it for me, it's what's in it for we. And so the reason we believe in it is because our history, our experience shows that when companies really engage in these principles, principles of transparencies, principles of shared visions and outcomes. We have found when both companies share those values, share in similar cultures, there's just greater success. They stay together longer. Partners they naturally grow apart over time if you're not very intentional about certain aspects of it. And I think what Vested does is that it helps to facilitate that transparency that partners should have. And it also helps to build a trust that creates that energy that leads to innovation. It almost forces you to bring new value, for both companies to look for new value, and not for one company to say, look, I'm going to beat you over the head and you get me what I want at the lowest possible cost. But it's what's in it for, I mean, it's just very, very basic and simple. It's what's in it for us. We know if you're successful, we're going to be successful. And that's why we like it.
Yeah, and one of the questions was, if a company incentivized here, is Vested doomed? So let me give you a great example from Dell. They're one of our case studies. So Procurement actually has a metric called purchase price variance. So the procurement person gets rewarded and incentivized on, if I paid $1 for something and next year I can buy the same thing for 95 cents, then I get a bonus, I get incentive. That's how I'm rewarded, purchase price variance. And so it's very me behavior. Well, if I flip that to total cost of ownership, and Elijah, you talked about that in the lesson, that it's about total cost of ownership. If you're if you're incentivized to drive down price on a transaction, right? Maybe the supplier isn't making an investment that could actually improve total cost. So we actually encouraged Dell and said, look, this metric is counter to what you want. And right. We look for those incentives and really shine a bright, shiny light on them and go, and you say you want this, but you're measuring X.
Right.
And so if you have that me behavior, those me metrics, it will be doomed. Exactly. It will be doomed. And so I'm glad somebody asked that, because don't say you want a strategic investment innovation and then measure and pay for and do things that are me. So you have to make that mindset shift.
Right, Kate, look, I think your point is so good here. I think this is an industry problem. This is why I like the fact that a major university is featuring education on something that is so relevant and so key to the discipline, because when that mentality persists, or when someone is bent on that mentality, it's not long term. The relationships typically do not last. It does not work, and I've seen it be fatal in I'm not going to say many, but in several situations. That very mentality.
So one more question here, and then I want to turn it over to the audience and see if they have questions. But then Amanda, so if it's doomed, if say you want strategic partnership, alignment of interest, vested, and you measure in a reward for me behavior, we know that's doomed, right? But you've got a buyer who has a tradition of me thinking, you know, I've got the hammer, the Dell case study, right? I've got the hammer every dollar every year. How do organizations like Dell and FedEx flip the model? How did Johnson and Johnson, who was very transactional and had that philosophy, or some of the other deals that you've done with, how do they actually undo what they have done in the past and move from that me to a we?
Yes, I think one of the key aspects there is also what we did is actually align on sort of having the same view to start off with, what is working and what is not working. So having a common ground of what is our sort of starting point here, and what do we want to achieve, and how should we achieve it, with defining the desired outcomes and objectives for that partnership. And by understanding sort of the elements in the contract and doing such, we did a review there for them to understand, so how can they improve? How can they make these changes in the way that they're structuring their deal to move from this me thinking towards the we thinking? And then we sort of help them in the education part, because this, I think, is one of the key elements to actually have a successful partnership, is to understand, so what is required of me and my partner to actually achieve this together. It's not going to be easy. And I know that everyone that we have done vested deal for thinks is really difficult in the beginning and really difficult to trust the process. But as you learn and get educated on what are the benefits and understanding what are the principles for actually achieving a true partnership, then people start to change slowly. And it's sort of a curve. It's not going to happen over time or overnight, but it happens over time. And the vested rules as well is structuring that approach to lay the foundation and understanding in the beginning. And that's also why you talk about the pricing model after 4 months of building that trust together. So it's very thought after, and the process helps you along the way, definitely.
Yeah, we just actually had the opportunity to study the 16 deals in the Nordics that EY and Serio Law Firm have done collectively. They're two of the organizations who have graduates from our Certified Architect program. And the number one lesson learned from all of those 16 deals was trust the process. So you think about the rules, the reason why people don't have the success that they want is because they're cheating on the rules. And so literally systematically going through the rules, looking at the contract, you talked, Amanda, about doing assessment and just saying, where are we cheating and what do we need to change? And one by one rule at a time, you're actually restructuring, or if it's a new relationship, structuring the relationship to follow the rules. Let's turn it over to the audience. We've got a lot of great folks here that have joined us. So does anyone have a question? Just hit that hand raise button and let's see if we've got any audience questions. I've got some more canned ones that came in the main session, but I can always answer those later. I want to make sure that the people who are coming to this session get their questions answered first. So any questions so far from the audience? They're all so shy, Mary. I can't believe it. They would, you know, so
that's a Nordic personality to be shy, right?
All right. So if you've got a question, you can pop it into chat as well. So if you prefer to do that, you can put it into chat. And I'm just going to kind of go through our list here. How are, you know, we talked, Amanda, about having that previous me mentality. You know, when you've got this friction in a relationship, and you know, trusting the process, following the process, but is there something that happens right up front where it's almost like putting the elephant in the room, having those trust discussions? How do you actually pivot that discussion to change?
Yeah, I think it all depends on sort of what function you are in the company, because I think that from a procurement perspective, you have some aspects that you're worried about. From the business, you have some aspects that you're worried about, and then from the legal aspect, you have some things that you're worried about. Going into a process that you might not know of in the beginning, that you're not sort of used to. And what we do is that we sort of discuss upfront what we call the guardrails or walk away points in terms of the partnership. So we actually outline sort of what are our sort of terms for negotiations in terms of, for example, we have a target of X percent margin that we need to have from a supplier perspective to actually be able to perform the services or be sort of part of this partnership, or it might be some compliance rules or something like that. And what we do before even going into the discussions between the buyer and supplier, and here we as EY are standing neutral to help them facilitate those type of discussions up front to understand, so are these walk away points, for first of all, even walk away points, are they really this crucial? And the second one, it's we bring up those sort of aspects that might be worrying a lot of people before moving into a partnership, and we talk about them and assessing, can we reach an agreement in terms of, for example, there might be a margin level, as I mentioned, and a cost aspect that we need to take into consideration. And so we bring that up front and build that trust and transparency and talking about it before even going into the vested process. And I think that is truly key, together with the education, to build that trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you used a term, I'm not sure that everyone on the call here knows the term, standing neutral. What do you mean by that? Because that's a term that you don't see a lot. And so talk about standing neutral and how EY itself as a leading advisory firm, how you had to change in order to really help organizations create these strategic vested deals.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's been really rewarding as well for me too, because usually we come in looking at the traditional deals that I've done, usually come in from the buyer perspective. They're hiring us as a as sort of advisor and help them negotiate the best price, pushing the supplier in terms of margin and trying to get the best deal, so to say, for the buyer. Whilst in a vested agreement and an approach, we come in as a standing neutral to facilitate the process to reach a balance between the buyer and supplier in developing the relational contract, which is based on trust rather than power. So we help help and facilitate the discussions between the parties along the vested journey. And in terms of to be completely transparent, both the buyer and supplier pay us 50% of the fees, so we have double amount of stakeholders to manage. And it's all those, from our perspective, it's been a difference because it's been a challenge in the beginning to gain that supplier trust because they've always been on the other side. So we have needed to be really changed our way of facilitating and building that trust between both parties and driving sort of the process forward.
Yeah, so that's interesting, right? And so why a neutral, right? So yeah. Why is that so important to the process versus you just representing the buyer? Because in the old day, and you still do some of this, right? So EY works with a lot of buyers in a very conventional way, where you represent only the buyer and your goal is to help the buyer get the best deal. What benefits does it have to have a neutral? And have you had pushbacks from the suppliers, right? So a customer comes to you and says, wow, I vested, you really need a neutral. And the supplier's going, what? Why is this? Of course, I can do this myself. So talk about that, because I think that's an interesting dimension.
Yeah, it's very interesting that usually upfront, the suppliers are pretty reluctant to having us as part of the process. But as we usually go along in the process, they realize and almost always need our support more to help the buyer think beyond sort of the traditional ways of thinking, more thinking about the we rather than me. So the purpose of having a standing neutral is that, first of all, we've seen that these processes has been much quicker than more traditional deals. So we truly help the parties finding and collaborating together to build that trust and find a balance between sort of risk and rewards in the discussions. And we as EY, we also have a lot of market knowledge about sort of benchmarks and other aspects, as well as other deals that we've done before, which are both traditional and vested, that we bring into the process to speed that up and show examples to truly help the parties in developing a vested win-win partnership.
Good. So Elijah, this next one's for you. So let's say a customer comes to you and it's, what do you do when there is a quote procurement mentality in a strategic or multi-million-dollar potential engagement, and they come with a beat the service provider down cost philosophy? So, hey, I've got all this big, huge strategic deal. I want you to be my strategic partner, but they've got the hammer and it's all about beating you up on cost. And they don't even talk about vested. What would you do as a service provider? So they say one thing and then they're doing something different. Yeah, how do you approach that?
That's a great question. What we typically try to do is to share our experiences. I mean, really, the experience we've had with these principles are very positive, and to show potential savings that we've realized with other case studies that can help them. And sometimes, quite just to be transparent, it is very difficult to shake that mentality, especially if it's not led from a senior level. So we do our best to share both from a procurement perspective and even to help the operations leaders in that environment understand the value of this vested approach and to show them the examples. If in the end, as we are trying to build and make our case toward this, vested approach, or even engaging, because we've seen a failure happen so many times over time, if we're not actually in that engagement and it's one that we're trying to get into, we might back away because we think it is so important to have that very open mentality, or it will not work. It does not represent the culture. It does not represent the value that we think, and especially as the discipline has matured, both parties, there needs to be positive outcomes for both parties. If we're in a multi-million-dollar opportunity and that procurement mentality is beating you down to lowest cost, it is one of those red flags for us that we say, maybe we don't want to do this one. And I'll give you just an example. Several years ago, we were in a bidding process where we submitted, and this wasn't vested, but we would have taken it there. We submitted a price that we thought was competitive. The procurement person that we were working with said, we really like you guys, but your price is still high. We knew that we were very competitive, and if anybody had a lower price, they had probably underbid it. And so we knew that, and we stuck to our guns, and we said, looks like we won't move forward. The company selected the lowest bid, and and then they ended up severing the relationship in about a year and a half. And the 3PL probably lost, I'm told, at least $1 million. So we've learned because of that, if we see that mentality, that we proceed with caution, okay? And sometimes we will back away.
Yeah.
One comment from me, I think one of the misperception of vested is that it's going to be more expensive, and that is definitely not the case. There is all the deals that we've done, there is always a cost component, usually something related to cost reduction. That is one of the desired outcomes of the partnership. So I think that is really key to highlight, because vested as an approach, sometimes people feel that it's a structured methodology, but it's also, as you haven't been part of the process, it's a bit intangible. It's the rules, but you can't really see them and understand them in full after not, or before having experienced the workshops and the sessions. So I really want to highlight that that price will be, or the pricing model will be, an element that we will discuss, but it preferably shouldn't be, or it shouldn't be the only driver for a strategic partnership.
Right.
And I don't think that a lot of company has that as a key driver for only cost in this environment that we're living in. There are much more value being delivered through attracting the right talent and retaining the right talent and driving other values. And by showing that, for example, to a procurement function and involving the business, I think that is sort of the key argument for sort of crossing that hurdle to have more productive discussions.
Yeah, Amanda, I'm glad you said that, because cost is actually usually front and center. People are stuck and they don't think they can get the cost down anymore, and they've been using a price. So we separate the concept of cost and price. As I mentioned in the main session, the cost or the cost or the cost or the cost. It's all transparent. So the supplier's profit is separated from the cost. So it's not a cost plus, it's a cost pass-through. So now we're all looking at the cost, and the goal of the supplier and the buyer are to come up with ways to reduce the cost. And when the cost goes down, the supplier is rewarded with more profit. So you're decoupling a perverse incentive, right? So you're making it very transparent. So you're looking at, instead of just showing up and doing the work and getting paid for the work is the work. If you need 10 people or 100 people or one building or 10 buildings, it doesn't matter. You're going to optimize. And when you actually optimize, that's when value is created. So all vested deals have a cost component. And I'll pick on the Dell case study because we profiled it in the Harvard Business Review article just last September. So same scope of work, same people, right? Same people, same scope. All that changed was how they followed the rules. So they said, we're going to change, and we call you a strategic partner, but when we do a look at how we're doing, we're cheating on the rules. So we're going to adhere to the rules. We're going to restructure our relationship and contract. Within 2 years, they reduced their cost structure 42%. Total cost of ownership, right? And so it's not about the price. Actually, I would say the amount of money that FedEx made was more money because they had incentives and bonuses, but they reduced the cost structure because there's more than just what's in the four walls. So all too often we're focusing on in the four walls and the opportunities beyond the four walls. And I think we had a comment here from Sandra about inventory. Absolutely, we see in a supply chain deal, inventory and optimizing inventory. Another would be speed to market. Jaguar, for example, with their partner Unipart, the old joke was you have to have 2 Jaguars, one in the car, one in the garage, and one in the shop and one driving. And so the 2 CEOs literally sat at a dinner table and said, why is it we have a 99% fill rate and we never have parts for our customers and they're always waiting on parts. And the CEO of Unipart said, because I ship everything you tell me that you have. This is your inventory. You plan. And when you do a bad job of planning, I can't ship it. So yeah, we're delivering a 99% fill rate according to your metrics, green scores, red faces. And so they sat out, and instead of having a 2-year contract, right, that they'd been working on, and then next year they have a 2-year contract and a 2-year contract, they had a 10-year contract and said, our goal, our outcome is to move from worst to first in JD Powers. When the customers, the external customers say that Jaguar's service parts logistics is beating Lexus, is beating Mercedes, then we know we're successful. So it's not about the fill rate, it's about what the customers say. And they actually had a 10-year plan to move from worst to first. In 7 years, they actually accomplished that, beating no one ever thought this was possible, right? And so, Sandra, you asked for some other types of examples in sustainability, right? And how you manage your reverse logistics as it relates to the forward logistics and driving all those sustainability pieces that is so important, especially if you're in Europe. In the US, we kind of have a hall pass sometimes. It's your corporate ethics versus your government ethics, but you don't have this choice when you're in Europe, right? So sustainability forward, we absolutely see that as a critical factor. And so your desired outcomes really are the business outcomes you're trying to achieve. And it's not just about fill rate. It's yes, cost is front and center. So lowering the cost structure, improving service, we call the power of the and. How do I get lower cost and higher service? Only through innovation. So these deals become about how do we work together to solve small little continuous improvement things and big ticket items to drive to better supply chains in a big way. All right, any other questions that are coming up? Is there any hands? Did I get a hand from anyone? I've got some great folks here on the call. Let's see, I've got someone from P&G. It looked like earlier I had someone from IBM. Anyone want to jump in?
Hey, Kate, it looks like Mickey's got a question for you.
Excellent. So Mickey.
Hi, how's it going?
Good.
My name is Mickey McDonough. I'm a second-year MBA student. First of all, I just want to say thank you for such an amazing discussion this morning. I had a question just about how a lot of what was spoke about were these global companies that may source products or work with suppliers outside of the United States. And I was just curious to see if there's any difference in creating these vested outcomes with US suppliers versus maybe international suppliers. And also if that has changed at all over the last 6 months with COVID.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I kind of see all of them. And Amanda, I'll let you kind of speak to it because you've seen global deals as well as you EU-based deals. But it really isn't about a international supplier versus a US supplier. It really is about what you're trying to achieve. So we've seen US deals to US suppliers. We've seen US suppliers to global. It really doesn't matter. Amanda, you talked about there's really no trend or any kind of rhyme or reason. I see all industries, healthcare with doctors. Okay, so the BC government has union employees for their doctors. And so one of the best success stories we have is how they worked with a union and their doctors. And so it really is about corporate culture and having an alignment and a cultural fit with that supplier. So you could have a US company with a UK-based supplier, and if they have a good cultural fit, it's going to work, right? And so cultural fit then is defined. We look at 5 dimensions, and this is some great work by Dr. Carl Manrod, a PhD out of the University of Tennessee. He's now at Georgia College, but he's done a thing called the Compatibility and Trust Assessment. Absolutely wonderful tool, and we love this tool. We really recommend it. I know, Amanda, you've used the CAT many times in some of your deals to just have the discussion about compatibility and trust. But how innovative are the parties? You know, we've seen a deal where the buyer was a not pharmaceutical, but medical supply, very innovative, super innovative. And the supplier hated innovation. They hated change. It's like, okay, just give me my spec. I'm maintenance. It's about maintenance and logistics maintenance, logistics support. And so they really didn't like change. So how focused are you? The buyer, you know, I call them attention deficit disorder. You know, it was like a little kid on, you know, that really couldn't sit still. Bing, bing, I'm over here, I'm over here, I'm over here, right? And so they attention deficit disorder, love change. The supplier was very focused, was very driven, did not like change, didn't like teaming too much. So they wanted to just be give me my statement of work and I'm going to deliver an amazing job. So the supplier was awesome. They just didn't have a good cultural fit. So we look for in partners cultural fit, and very, very important. And so this is why so many of the deals we see are what we call flips. So they're restructuring of existing relationships. So they have a good partner, they've built a decent foundation, they're just cheating on the rules. Right? And so many go, well, I should take this out to bid. And it's like, would you pick the different, you know, gosh, golly gee, you've taken it out to bid 4 times and every time the same supplier wins. You know, is it, you know, you must like them for a certain reason. Yeah. What's preventing you from being successful, and what prevents them is that they really are cheating on these rules. They're themselves holding them back. So there's no, you know, I hate to say I don't have a great magic bullet answer. It really is about cultural fit, and it doesn't matter where the supplier lies. We see global deals, we see regional deals. I mean, there's no trend or pattern. It's the pattern is people are stuck. And who has the courage, and Elijah, you talked about this earlier, the courage to actually move away from decades, I mean, centuries. I mean, some of these companies have been buy, sell for 100 years. You know, and that's all they know is buying and selling at the transactional level. And they just don't know how to undo that. And that's really what we teach is a methodology, a structured methodology that helps people get out of their existing method to a different method. So Ryan, you've volunteered here in chat. Can I pick on you?
Yeah, I've just kind of been wondering because, you know, we all know like game theory and, you know, the prisoner dilemma and all, and that, you know, trust is kind of an opportunity to, you know, try to gain something on your own. So is there like mechanisms in this vested method to account for that? Or is it just that when it works good, and if it stops working for everybody, then it doesn't work? Or... Yeah,
so that's a fantastic question. Actually, the vested methodology is actually based on research coming out of game theory and behavioral economics. So I'm really glad you saw that, because it is at the heart of the foundational research that we do. I mean, Oliver Hart co-authored the HB article, Die Hard Economics, and now he used to be a traditional economist. Now he's really brought in the behavioral economics piece. And so this is why we have to have a formal relational contract, because we can do some of these things outside of the contract, right? And have a great relationship, but it's actually not sustainable. And so in the contract, and I encourage you to read the HBR article. You don't have to have a subscription. You can just go and type in Vitasek vested HBR and you're gonna see it. It'll pop up. If you haven't abused your free number of free times you can ping HBR per month. We create, the team agrees on guiding principles, social norms and guiding principles. So you commit to transparency, you commit to equity, fairness, and you actually define what these look like. So literally in the contract, here's our shared vision. So in an HBR article, we show what this looks like for Island Health. We enter into this agreement and we're going to climb our Mount Everest, right? So here's our shared vision. Here's our 5 desired outcomes. So it's a long-term partnership to change how you're doing. If Jaguar and Unipart, a 10-year partnership to rethink their entire supply chain to deliver and beat Lexus, to beat Mercedes. And then they have the words around the guiding principles. We agree to these guiding principles. So when we start to cheat, Ryan, in game theory, right? You've got your 2x2 matrix. And when I start, and I actually teach this slide, when I start to waver from collaboration, I get into what I call ping pong. We start to use Oliver Hart's term, shade, right? So we waver from that win-win. You actually use your governance mechanisms to lift you back up and put you back in the win-win category. And this is why your pricing model has to be aligned. This is why your governance has to be aligned. So you're not just saying win-win and then becoming opportunistic as you come. You've created mechanisms that force you back in. It creates a system. And in contracting terms, it's called a self-correcting contract. So great question. I'm glad you brought in that. So Elijah, Amanda, you want to chime in on that? Anything to add?
No, not for me. No.
Good. Yep. So I have another question here that came in, and it was, you know, how do you protect the downside of comparative risk when it's not equal? So they use the word Walmart. So Walmart's working with a small 3PL. So losing together is not a big deal for Walmart, but it's a massive deal for the small 3PL and would actually put them out of work. So bankrupt them. So Amanda, how would the pricing model take an advantage of this? Because a lot of people think, oh, you know, it only works if one party has a lot of power and the other doesn't, one's way bigger. But we've seen deals where the supplier is bigger than the buyer. We've seen them where they're equal. So how do you actually deal with that in the pricing model? Talk a little bit about that and margin matching and those concepts.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I mean, developing that pricing model is, as we talked about earlier on, is to incentivize the joint alignment towards the desired outcomes and objectives. And the pricing model itself is based on the cost pass-through, primarily the cost pass-through aspects, driving the incentives to the supplier to actually perform the services in a better, quicker, faster way, to reach the agreed upon desired outcomes. But I mean, if there are business aspects that happens, for example, that you state earlier on in the process, we ensure that there are mechanisms that both parties bring up if the pricing model is no longer valid. So that could be inflation or exchange rates, or something happen out in the nature that we can't really control. So we have the governance model where we actually discuss and review the pricing model on a sort of usually a quarterly basis or similar, to ensure that the assumptions that we base this pricing model on are still relevant. And if we see, also back to the guiding principles, if we see that this is not fair and balanced, the partners talk about this and ensure that they address any inequalities as it should be in line with the guiding principles. So what we see, both in terms of how we structure the pricing model, but also the elements of the governance piece, and together with the guiding principles, we ensure that the parties discuss this on a regular basis to ensure that this sort of challenges doesn't occur.
Right. So, and one of the philosophies is the cost is the cost is the cost, very transparent, and you're splitting the supplier's profit out of the cost. So their profit is separated. So if the costs go up, the supplier would never lose money on a vested deal, because the cost are the cost are the cost, and the buyer's asking the supplier to incur cost at their expense. The supplier would lose profit. So they may make no profit, but they're not going to go bankrupt because the supplier needed certain cost. And then there's a technique called margin matching. And so there's a low and a high. And as business happens, your goal is to stay within this margin matching. So if one party, if the small 3PL's profit goes below a certain level, like let's say it was 0 for 6 months, that would violate the principle of equity, which is fairness, because the goal isn't for the supplier to make no money for 6 months. And so you just come back and say, well, this isn't fair. What are we doing? What's changed in the assumptions of our pricing model that makes it no longer valid? We have to tweak our pricing model. So that the way the model is built and how it's governed actually protects the interest of both parties.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I mean, 2 of the deals that we have done, the suppliers have actually had discussions with their partner that they're not even making any profit on some aspects of the scope, for example, and bringing that up front and having a joint discussion and being transparent, saying, how can we solve this together? And one of the clients, which is sort of renowned for having really good relationships with their suppliers, were horrified for realizing that they didn't make any money on some aspects of the scope. So, but in the end, after doing the pricing model and shifting that focus to cover all the costs, but still pay out for performance, they still ended up reducing the total cost for the entire deal. So because they managed the total cost of ownership and allocated the resources in the best possible way to optimize the partnership. And I think that is what is driving the pricing model, is driving those type of behaviors.
Yeah. So we have time for 2 more questions, and we have 2 hands up, one from Sandra and one from Nanika. So let's go to Nanika first. Did I say that right?
So Nanika, yeah, there you go.
So Nanika, you're up.
Can't hear you.
Yep. So let's go over to Sandra. Let's go over to Sandra, and maybe Nanika, you can put your I see you can't unmute for some reason. You can put that in chat. So Sandra, you're up. What was your question?
So before you talked, Amanda, you had talked about some intangible things that you sometimes tried to incorporate into these cost discussions. Have you found that some of the companies that you're working with are good at quantifying those things, or is that something that you can help with?
Do you mean, just to clarify the question, so in terms of, for example, attractive employees and sustainability aspects? Yeah, of course, it's what we do is based on the desired outcomes, we see that some of the sort of KPIs that they have ongoing in the partnership are working. And then some aspects and experience is that we need to develop those KPIs, strategic KPIs in the partnership. And of course, we have a lot of experience from other deals as well, and having identified how you can actually measure these intangibles. But in the end, we are, once again, the standing neutral. So we're more presenting potential options for the parties to agree on how they want to measure their partnership. So of course, we can make suggestions, and that's sort of how we facilitate the process along the way, making the suggestions and also ensuring that they follow the rules. But in the end, it's the part of these decisions. But we, of course, bring in our expertise and experience from other deals as well, and what we see in the market.
Good. So one last, actually, so Mary, you said you've got Nanika's question. So let's answer her question before we wrap.
Okay.
I figured out how to unmute. Sorry, I've got it.
Great. Okay, perfect. Cool. Go for it.
I just was wondering if you've done any exploration in the space at all, but if customers are treated as like a turn-by-turn mutually exclusive resource, kind of like they are right now during the pandemic, how do you establish a competitive advantage? Because there's not simultaneous competition anymore, especially like between Amazon and Walmart. It's a lot of it redundant.
Yeah, so actually what we would teach is in a vested agreement, if you use, and we have a whole book on this, it's called Strategic Sourcing in the New Economy. You can create more value with a smaller number of players. So just because, I'll use this example. So McDonald's, is beef a commodity? Absolutely, beef's a commodity. You can actually go and auction, they have beef auctions. McDonald's would say, no, it's not. It's a strategic weapon. And I choose to have long-term strategic partnerships with my suppliers that I do not compete. So while they have 5 beef suppliers, each one has its own swim lane. So the supplier that they have that manages beef for North America is not the same for Australia. It's not the same for another area. And so while they have competitors, they're actually not competing. They've dedicated long-term relationships. They do not bid their work out. So there is no bid. Now a supplier can exit. So if they're not performing, if they're not driving innovation, driving cost structures down, they will actually be what McDonald's will call exited from the system. And so in the book, Strategic Sourcing in the Economy, we talk about the 7 sourcing business models and why you would want to shift up the continuum to a strategic partnership where you actually had more of a sole source, or a worst case, maybe a dual source. You maybe have a US and a UK or a Europe solution where you're being much more strategic. So when you use, it goes back to that game theory comment that we had earlier. You can use the market and the market will bear a result. But if you don't like the results the market's bearing, maybe you should not use the market and create a strategic alliance, a strategic partnership. So vested is more like a joint venture. I tell people, think of it as a joint venture without a joint venture. It's the intent to have a strategic partnership and you're going to consciously follow rules. And when you cheat on the rules, your governance, you might have a standing neutral that's going to put you back and help you follow the rules. Because when you follow the rules, you will create more value than the market would have given you. McDonald's cost structure is 33 to 75% less than using the market. So they can buy benchmark data. And the reason why they don't use the market is because they create more value with strategic partnerships than they do by using the market. So we're tempted to use the market and use competition because that's what we're taught. And what we find is when you choose to not use the market and to choose to create a strategic partnership, you can use the market, you can use what we call a request for partner to get to a vested deal, you will actually create more value. And it's not for everyone, not all deals. P&G, I left, P&G has 80,000 suppliers, they can't all be strategic, right? You got to pick your few partners that you can create value. So with that, we're about out of time. And I want to turn it back over to you, Mary, to wrap up for the day. And I have a couple more questions we didn't get to ask, but I promise I will send those out to you and you can post them to the forum. And I noticed that you said the HBR article, thank you. You made that available to everyone. So you don't even have to work hard. You can just go to your app and download that article.
Yeah. See, that is the beauty of having people like Hannah and Michelle and Cole who can figure all that out. But thanks to Hannah for doing that. And thanks to all of you. Thanks to everyone who participated. And a special thanks to Kate, Elijah, and Amanda. Like virtual hand clap for you all. This was really great. I really appreciate it. And I invite everyone to our next forum session will be tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern time. And that is with Janet Duffy and Justin Dillard with Lockheed Martin. A different topic. Each one of these sessions is on a slightly different take, and this is leading through challenging times. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. We really appreciate it, and it was great to actually see you all. So have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.